What up, guys? So recently I saw some videos and posts and things like that talking about sport jiu-jitsu and dogging it, saying, oh, sport jiu-jitsu, you're going to get your butt whooped in it, and, you know, it's useless, it's not good for fighting, and they were making fun of people pulling guard, that whole deal. And, you know, this happens every few years. People talk about this stuff and they make these claims and things like that. And from a coach who, well, I've done a lot of sport jiu-jitsu, also done MMA, and have plenty of jiu-jitsu students who do sport jiu-jitsu, I figured it's an interesting idea to talk about, especially people getting into the sport. And so you can let me know what you guys think in the comments about whether or not sport jiu-jitsu will get you, beat up in a fight, whatever. But think about it like this. This is how I look at fighting. Fighting to me in jiu-jitsu, combat sports, wrestling, boxing, MMA, all of it to me is a form of fighting, right? Different levels and intensities and different styles, but it's all fighting. And fighting to me is like a language, right? There's different languages, whole systems of languages. There's different dialects to each one of those languages, different ways they can be used. And we start to develop an intuitive sense of how to use them in certain ways. So the way that I speak to my son, the way that I speak to my wife, the way that I speak to my students, the way that I speak to someone who's being very aggressive to me, the way that I speak to a legal professional, all of those are very different, aren't they? The way that I speak to you is different. And we manipulate and use language in all sorts of different ways, and we develop a sense of when it's right, when it's wrong, when it's the right time to do it, don't we? Well, like that, I think of fighting again as a language, and there's different systems of languages. We got striking, we got grappling, we got mixed. You have different dialects. We got judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo. We got boxing, kickboxing, so forth. And we use our fighting in different ways, just like language. Like, for instance, I will wrestle with my son. Now, it's not necessarily fighting per se, but he is learning how to play fight, right? We're like wrestling around and he's putting me in headlocks and stuff like that. It doesn't even know what you're doing. We're just wrestling, right? That's very playful fun. Then there is going to the gym and training hard with one of my good training partners, right? Who's comparatively skilled towards me, and we're having a good match. That's like having two good buddies who are having a spirited discussion with each other. They may disagree with each other. They're trying to get their point across, but they're doing so without any sort of anger towards one another. They're doing so and sharing their ideas, but with mutual care for the other person, right? So when we're going hard. We're stepping up the intensity a little bit. Then you go to a competition, where in a competition setting, there is no anger towards a person generally. There's no animosity. It's just aggression and intensity because you want to win. Going back to the idea, it's like debating someone. You may not dislike them. You may just want to get your point across, right? And that sort of conversation, that the manipulation of the language in that sense is going to be a little bit higher, won't it? And then there's a situation where if you were actually fighting in some situation to protect yourself, that's a whole nother ballpark, isn't it? If anybody you've ever had to do that before, you understand what that feels like. And so what I'm getting at is that when you look at combat sports, all of them represent sort of a different level of fighting and a different manipulation of this language of fighting that we do. And for the most part, none of them are truly like one for one going to translate over to a fight. Because sure, jiu-jitsu, if you look at sport jiu-jitsu, of course, it doesn't make any sense why you would sit down on your butt and pull guard in a fight situation, does it? But in a jiu-jitsu setting, it makes perfect sense because if, like, say that you're facing a person who's a better wrestler than you, why would you stand up with them and play their game? Make them play your game. And if leg locks you're effective with, let's use those then. Right? Also, I would tell you that a lot of times what happens is, and if you've ever had this experience, many of my students have, where they've had to use their jiu-jitsu in a fighting situation, a lot of times the fundamentals, like your basic clinch work, takedowns, close guard, all that stuff works pretty effectively against people who are untrained and who don't know what they're doing. And a lot of them say it's surprisingly easy to control someone. Well, that's basic stuff. But eventually, if you're going to train this stuff for 10, 20 years, you start to delve into the jiu-jitsu versus jiu-jitsu because it's fun. But there's a lot of stuff in jiu-jitsu that wouldn't work in a fight. But the same is true for every combat sport. There's stuff in boxing that wouldn't work in a true fight situation where, there's no rules. In boxing, sometimes we'll get shoulder to shoulder right here and we're sticking punches into the body or to the head or whatever. You're not going to do that in a real fight situation. The person could clinch and take you down and get a hold of you. You would probably keep distance with a jab, wouldn't you? Or something like that. Wrestling, same thing. There's stuff in wrestling you wouldn't do in a fight situation. Like in a wrestling situation, I'm not going to go belly down because some person's trying to get a tilt on me. If for some reason they're behind me, I'm going to get up and get away from them or try to counter them with a takedown to slam them, right? Even MMA itself, it's a fight for sure. MMA is. You got a lot more weapons, but there's still stuff we wouldn't do in MMA because there's restrictions. Like when, the person's on, like, his standing up and they'll put one hand down so the person is now had 3 points of contact so they can't knee them. Well, we're not going to do that in a fight situation, are we? Because there's no rules. Likewise, we have to be worried about things like soccer kicks and stuff that, sometimes in certain organizations exist, but not in like the UFC as an example. So none of them are truly realistic, right? And at some point it becomes that we're just playing sport versus sport. But that said, I just believe this, and this is just my bearded opinion, and it's been the experience that I've seen with many of my students, that a lot of times, just like we intuitively know how to manipulate language for the particular situation that we're in, most people have a decent sense of, hey, this whole sitting guard business is probably not the best idea for a fight situation. Probably best to do a takedown or to create distance and get away from the person, right? Something to that degree. Likewise, the boxers probably not go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit on the inside of here and work uppercuts. No, you're probably going to keep the person at bay with a jab and try to get away from the situation. We intuitively start to develop that. That's at least what I've seen from, coaching and being around the gym for, 20 plus years. And so I just always see these arguments of making fun of sport jiu-jitsu and saying, oh, it's going to get you killed. I always just think they're silly because, again, none of us that are doing sport jiu-jitsu are saying, hey, this is my fighting jiu-jitsu. This is what I'm going to use in a fight. We're doing this because this is fun. We're doing this because at a certain point, the fundamentals that typically you focus on a fight are, all right, we've covered them. It kind of gets boring. I don't want to do this all day long. It would be fun to do some sport jiu-jitsu where that becomes a far more engaging and sort of mentally captivating thing. Now, there is something to keep in mind. If you're training at a gym for self-defense in part, you should have takedowns. And so if your gym never does takedowns, you should say, coach, can we do some takedowns? Takedowns are really important to be able to take people down and not be taken down if it's a fight situation. Also, too, if you're doing this for self-defense, I would tell you that it's a worthwhile thing to do a little bit of striking. I'm not saying you got to be a pro boxer, but I do think it's useful to have some boxing experience and even a little bit of sparring experience if you can. Because I've seen so many people where, they think they know what they're doing. And then you put them in the ring, like they've been doing bag work and they look super smooth. They get to the ring, their hands are up and they're like moving and they look good, right? They look like they actually have boxed before. And then as soon as you have them do a jab drill where some person is lightly tapping them on the forehead, just a light punch, not even really digging into it. All of a sudden they get tensed up, their body starts moving and they're exhausted in like a minute. They're exhausted from it. I would tell you it's a smart thing to do, to have a little experience there. Again, I'm not saying you got to get your head smashed in, but it's a good experience if you train at a good gym to have some experience in that realm so you know what that's like. It's just like someone going into jiu-jitsu and never rolling and thinking they could, fight or deal with a competition setting. Not going to happen, right? As soon as you roll, you get exhausted because you're having this person trying to choke you or grab you and it jars you. Again, this is one of my things I've talked about multiple times, that one of the things you get from combat sports, boxing, wrestling, sambo, judo, all of them, is that you learn to deal with the stress of actually fighting another human being. Being grabbed, being punched, being thrown around, whatever that is, you get used to that. And it becomes very normal. This the other day, me and my students were working on this escaping like smashed positions. And again, if you're jiu-jitsu, one of the things you learn how to do is be so comfortable and calm in those smashed positions. Your face is getting smashed down on the mat. You can barely breathe, whatever. And it's just a normal day at the office. No big deal. Whereas you get the brand new person and they're hyperventilating, they're pushing and shoving, they're freaking out. You learn to be comfortable and calm with that. And that happens with all these different sports. And it's one of the best things you get that translates over into a fight situation, being able to think in really stressful situations. And so with you guys, what do you think? I don't think that sport jiu-jitsu is going to get you killed. And in fact, I think sometimes the sport element of going really hard for competitions or even really hard in a training session, while it doesn't translate one for one with all the technical stuff, that feeling of going really hard, getting exhausted, having someone really try to smash you is really effective for what it's going to possibly be like when person is grabbing your head and squeezing and you've got to figure out and think your way through the situation and react to it. What do you guys think? Love to see your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think, guys. And that's my piece. That's an idea to chew on. And I'll talk to you guys next time.